Welcome, dear one. You've reached a precious moment in your day, the time to unwind, to let go, and to prepare for deep, restful sleep. As you lie in your bed, allow yourself to settle into comfort. Feel the weight of your body against the mattress, the softness of your pillow supporting you. Adjust yourself however you need until everything feels just right. Now, gently close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose, feeling your chest rise as you fill your lungs. Hold it for a moment, then exhale softly through your mouth. Let's do this again. Breathe in deeply, and as you exhale, release any tension from your body. With every breath, feel yourself sinking a little deeper into relaxation. Picture yourself in a serene place as your day's worries fade away. You're standing at the edge of a quiet meadow at twilight. The sky above is painted in soft shades of lavender and gold, with the first stars beginning to twinkle. A gentle breeze brushes your skin, cool and soothing, carrying the faint scent of flowers and fresh earth. In this tranquil scene, you notice a path winding ahead. Each step you take along this path feels effortless, as if the ground itself is inviting you forward. The sounds of nature surround you, the rustling leaves, the soft chirp of crickets, and the distant murmur of a stream. Soon, you arrive at a small, cozy cottage tucked between the trees. A warm golden light spills from its windows, beckoning you inside. As you step through the door, you feel instantly at home. The space is simple but perfect, a crackling fire in the hearth, the scent of lavender and cedar in the air, and in the corner, a bed piled high with soft, inviting blankets. You move toward the bed and lie down. The mattress cradles you, the blankets wrapping you in warmth and safety. The sound of the fire crackling is like a gentle lullaby, coaxing you deeper into relaxation. As you rest in this peaceful place, let go of any lingering thoughts from the day. Imagine them drifting away like leaves carried by a gentle stream. Here, there is nothing to fix, nothing to do, just rest. Feel your breath becoming slower and steadier, your body heavier and more relaxed. With each moment, you drift closer to the soft, quiet embrace of sleep. Let yourself sink into this restful state, knowing that you are safe, loved, and completely at peace. Now, it's time to let go fully. Drift into dreams, into calm, and into the soothing stillness of the night. Good night, dear one. Sleep deeply and wake refreshed.
Chapter 1. Eric adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Jennifer, who was peering out the passenger side window. Her auburn hair caught the late afternoon sunlight, and she was smiling faintly as the first hints of the Rocky Mountains appeared on the horizon. "Almost there," Eric said, his voice soft yet excited. The long week behind them had felt endless, but this drive toward Estes Park felt like the beginning of something new. A chance to breathe. Jennifer turned toward him, her smile widening. "Do you think the pictures of the Stanley Hotel will live up to the real thing? I can already feel the stories waiting for us there." "Let's just hope it's less haunted than they say," Eric teased, his grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I wouldn't mind some peace and quiet this weekend." The town of Estes Park emerged like a postcard brought to life. Quaint streets lined with boutique shops and art galleries wound their way toward the heart of the town, where the majestic Stanley Hotel stood perched on a hill, its white facade glowing against the blue sky. Eric parked the car near a small cafe, the aroma of freshly baked pastries and roasting coffee wafting through the crisp mountain air. "Let's stretch our legs before checking in," Jennifer suggested, stepping out and wrapping her scarf tighter against the cool breeze. They wandered hand in hand down Elkhorn Avenue, the town's main street, where storefronts displayed everything from handcrafted jewelry to adventure gear. Outside a bookstore, an elderly shopkeeper greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome to Estes Park," she said, her voice rich and melodic. "Are you visiting the Stanley?" Jennifer nodded eagerly. "We are." "Any tips for first-timers?" The shopkeeper chuckled. "Take your time. The hotel's history is fascinating, but don't forget to explore the rest of the town. The cafe just down the street makes the best hot chocolate, perfect after a walk by the lake." Eric and Jennifer thanked her and continued their leisurely stroll, savoring the slow pace of mountain life. They soon found themselves drawn to the river walk, where the gentle gurgling of the Big Thompson River provided a soothing soundtrack. As the sun dipped lower, painting the peaks in shades of gold and lavender, they arrived at the Stanley Hotel. The grand building exuded an old-world charm, its colonial architecture framed by the rugged mountain backdrop. Eric couldn't help but feel a sense of reverence as they walked through the entrance, the rich scent of polished wood and faint whispers of history welcoming them inside. Their room was a cozy haven of deep reds and warm browns, with a bay window that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. Jennifer set her bag on the chaise lounge and sank into the plush bed with a contented sigh. "Perfect," she murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Eric joined her by the window, watching the twilight settle over the town. "Dinner?" he asked after a few minutes, not wanting to disturb her peace but eager to explore. "Only if it involves something warm and comforting," Jennifer replied, her eyes twinkling as she pulled herself upright. At Bird and Jim, a restaurant known for its locally sourced ingredients, the couple found exactly what they were craving. A corner table near the fireplace offered both privacy and ambience, and the menu promised hearty dishes like bison short ribs and wild mushroom risotto. As they ate, they talked about their plans for the weekend, wildlife spotting, exploring alpine lakes, and perhaps even tackling a historic walking tour of the park. Jennifer's gaze softened as she reached for Eric's hand across the table. "Thank you for planning this. I needed it more than I realized." Eric squeezed her hand gently. "We both did. Here's to a weekend of no deadlines and no distractions. Just us." Outside, the night had taken full hold, a blanket of stars sparkling above the peaks. Back at the hotel, they lingered for a moment on the balcony, wrapped in a shared silence that felt as vast and timeless as the mountains themselves. When they finally climbed into bed, the soft creak of the old wooden frame and the distant hum of the wind lulled them into a restful calm. Eric turned off the bedside lamp, leaving only the dim glow of the moonlight spilling through the curtains. "Good night, Jen," he whispered. "Good night, Eric," she replied, her voice drowsy but filled with contentment. Within moments, the rhythmic sound of their breathing filled the room, matching the serene rhythm of the mountains beyond. Chapter 2. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in hues of gold. Eric stirred first, the stillness of the mountains easing him awake. He glanced over at Jennifer, who was curled up under the soft duvet, her breathing steady and peaceful. For a moment, he considered letting her sleep longer, but the excitement of the day ahead tugged at him. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Jennifer opened her eyes, blinking away the remnants of sleep. "Morning already," she murmured, her voice thick with drowsiness. "Trail Ridge Road is calling," Eric teased. "And I hear the views are even better with coffee." That was enough to rouse her. Within an hour, they were checked out and on the road, their car loaded with a day pack, water bottles, and the anticipation of adventure. The drive up Trail Ridge Road began slowly, winding through the foothills where pine trees stood tall and dense, their earthy aroma drifting through the open windows. As they climbed higher, the landscape transformed. Dense forests gave way to sprawling meadows, their golden grasses swaying gently in the cool morning breeze. Eric pulled over at the first overlook, a wide expanse of land that opened to reveal distant peaks crowned with snow. "Wow," Jennifer breathed, stepping out of the car and wrapping her jacket tighter against the chill. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, each ridge and valley seeming to whisper its own ancient tale. Eric joined her at the railing, resting his hands on the cool metal. "I can see why they call this the highway to the sky. It feels like we're on top of the world." They lingered for a while, savoring the stillness, before continuing their ascent. At Rainbow Curve, they stopped again, drawn by the promise of even more breathtaking views. A park ranger was stationed at the overlook, pointing out landmarks to a small group of visitors. When Eric and Jennifer approached, he greeted them warmly. "Good morning. First time on Trail Ridge Road?" Jennifer nodded. "It is. This is incredible." The ranger smiled knowingly. "It has a way of making people fall in love with the Rockies. You're standing at about 10,800 feet here, and as you head further up, you'll cross the alpine tundra. It's one of the rarest ecosystems in the world." Eric tilted his head curiously. "What makes it so rare?" "The conditions," the ranger explained. "Up here, it's cold, windy, and the growing season is incredibly short. Only the hardiest plants and animals can survive. It's like its own little world." They thanked the ranger and resumed their drive, their anticipation growing with each bend in the road. As they climbed above the tree line, the landscape became otherworldly. Low-lying shrubs and vibrant wildflowers dotted the ground, their resilience a quiet testament to the harsh environment. At Rock Cut Overlook, they parked again, drawn by the panoramic views of the tundra and the peaks beyond. A short trail led them to a rocky outcrop where the air was thinner but impossibly fresh. Jennifer pointed to a tiny, furry creature darting between the rocks. "Is that a pika?" she asked, her voice tinged with wonder. Eric laughed softly. "I think so. Didn't we read about them being native to this area?" "They're like mountain rabbits," Jennifer said, her eyes alight. "I can't get over how perfect this place feels." Eric took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's like we've stepped into a painting." For a while, they sat on the rocks, letting the silence wash over them. The wind carried the faintest scent of pine and alpine flowers, and the occasional chirp of a bird echoed through the vastness. It felt as though time had paused, allowing them to exist entirely in the moment. Eventually, they began the descent toward Grand Lake, the road winding its way through more breathtaking vistas. They stopped at Forest Canyon Overlook for one final view before leaving the tundra behind. "I feel like we've only scratched the surface of this place," Jennifer said as they climbed back into the car. "There's so much history here. Can you imagine what it was like for the first people to see this land?" Eric smiled. "They must have felt the same all we do now. Probably even more, knowing they were discovering something untouched." The drive down was just as mesmerizing as the ascent, with new angles revealing the grandeur of the Rockies. As they reached the edge of Grand Lake, the landscape softened into rolling hills and lush greenery. The lake itself shimmered under the midday sun, a mirror reflecting the towering peaks. Jennifer stretched as she stepped out of the car. "Let's find some lunch before exploring." Eric pointed toward a rustic lakeside cafe tucked beneath towering pines. "That looks promising." The cafe offered simple but hearty fare, sandwiches piled high with fresh ingredients, steaming bowls of soup, and warm bread that smelled like heaven. They ate outside, the gentle lapping of the water providing a soothing backdrop. "Do you think we'll ever get tired of views like this?" Jennifer asked, her voice tinged with awe. Eric shook his head. "Not a chance." After lunch, they took a slow stroll along the shore, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of pine, mingling with the rich aroma of the lake. A few kayakers paddled leisurely across the water, their laughter echoing in the stillness. "This feels like a different world," Jennifer said softly. "Like we've stepped out of time." Eric nodded, pulling her close. "And it's ours to explore." They lingered until the afternoon sun began its descent, casting golden light over the water. The peaceful rhythm of the lake, the stories of the road behind them, and the adventures still to come filled their hearts with a deep, unshakable calm. Chapter 3. Eric woke to the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore, a sound that seemed to blend perfectly with the rustling of leaves in the cool morning breeze. He turned his head toward Jennifer, who was still wrapped in the covers, her face soft with the serenity of sleep. The small cabin they had rented near Grand Lake was humble but inviting, with wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and a view that made the entire trip worthwhile. "Morning, love," Eric said quietly as Jennifer stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "I thought we could start the day by the lake." Jennifer stretched lazily, her face lighting up at the thought. "That sounds perfect. Coffee first?" Minutes later, they found themselves sitting on the cabin's small deck, steaming mugs of coffee warming their hands. The morning sun painted the lake in hues of orange and gold, and the mist rising off the water gave it an almost mystical quality. "It's like a painting," Jennifer said, breaking the comfortable silence. "You can almost feel the stories this place holds." Eric leaned back in his chair, taking a deep sip of his coffee. "Speaking of stories, did you know Grand Lake used to be an important meeting point for Ute tribes long before it became a tourist spot? I read about it last night." Jennifer tilted her head in thought. "I can see why. It feels sacred, doesn't it? Like it's meant to be shared and respected." After finishing their coffee, they decided to walk into the heart of the small town. Grand Lake's main street was as charming as they had hoped, lined with rustic wooden storefronts that looked like they belonged in a frontier town. Eric was particularly taken with an old-fashioned general store, its window display filled with vintage lanterns, fishing gear, and hand-carved trinkets. As they strolled, an elderly man sitting on a bench outside the store tipped his hat in greeting. "Good morning, folks," he said with a friendly smile. "First time in Grand Lake?" "Yes, it is," Jennifer replied, her curiosity piqued by the man's warm demeanor. "Any recommendations for a couple of newcomers?" The man chuckled, his eyes twinkling with a mix of wisdom and mischief. "Well, if you're looking for a bit of history, you might wander over to the Grand Lake Historical Society. They've got stories that'll take you back to the old days. And if you're feeling adventurous, there's always the East Inlet Trail. Leads to some beautiful spots." They thanked him and continued their walk, deciding to save the trail for later. Instead, they found themselves drawn to the water's edge, where a small pier extended into the lake. Jennifer leaned against the railing, watching as sunlight danced across the surface. "Do you ever feel like places like this make time slow down?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a reflective tone. Eric stood beside her, his gaze following hers. "I do. It's like the world here operates on a different rhythm, one that we don't get to experience often enough." They rented a canoe and spent the late morning gliding across the lake's tranquil waters. The only sounds were the rhythmic dipping of the paddles and the occasional call of a loon echoing across the expanse. Jennifer trailed her fingers through the water, the coolness contrasting with the warmth of the sun on her face. "This might be my favorite moment so far," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just us, the water, and the mountains." Eric smiled, the contentment in her voice filling him with a quiet joy. "It doesn't get much better than this." After returning the canoe, they wandered into a nearby cafe for lunch. The wooden interior was cozy, filled with the hum of low conversation and the clink of silverware on plates. They shared a hearty meal of fresh trout and locally baked bread, the flavors as comforting as the setting. "I could get used to this," Jennifer said as they lingered over their meal. Slowing down. Savoring everything. Eric nodded, his hand resting on hers across the table. "I think that's the magic of this place. It reminds you what's important." The afternoon was spent exploring the Grand Lake Historical Society's small but captivating museum. The exhibits painted vivid pictures of the area's past, from its days as a hub for Ute tribes to its transformation into a haven for settlers and eventually, a beloved tourist destination. One display in particular caught Jennifer's eye, a series of black and white photographs showing life on the lake in the early 1900s. Families in their Sunday best posed by the water, children played on wooden docks, and canoes dotted the shore. She pointed to one photo of a couple standing arm in arm. "Look at them," she said softly. "You can tell they loved it here, just like we do now." Eric studied the photograph, imagining the lives behind the faces. "It's funny, isn't it? We're part of the same story now. Different times, same place." As the day began to wind down, they decided to walk the shoreline one last time. The golden hour bathed everything in a soft, warm glow, and the water reflected the surrounding peaks like a flawless mirror. They found a quiet spot under a cluster of pines and sat down, leaning into each other as the day's adventures settled into a peaceful memory. "I'm glad we came here," Jennifer said after a while, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "Me too," Eric replied. "It's exactly what we needed." They watched as the first stars began to appear, their light faint but steady against the darkening sky. The quiet intimacy of the moment wrapped around them, making the rest of the world fade away. When they finally returned to their cabin, the fire Eric had lit earlier still crackled softly in the hearth. They curled up together on the couch, a thick blanket draped over them, and let the soothing rhythm of the flames lull them into silence. Eric glanced down at Jennifer, who had already started to drift off, her head resting on his shoulder. He smiled and pressed a light kiss to her hair, the peacefulness of the day still lingering in his heart. "Good night, love," he whispered, though he knew she was already deep in the embrace of sleep. The room grew quiet save for the gentle hum of the fire, and Eric closed his eyes, letting the calm of the mountains carry him away. Chapter 4. The sun was already peeking over the ridges when Eric and Jennifer ventured out the next morning. The crisp air carried the earthy scent of pine, and the sound of birdsong punctuated the stillness. Today, they had planned to explore Moraine Park, one of the most famous wildlife viewing areas in Rocky Mountain National Park. Jennifer laced her boots as Eric studied the trail map on his phone. "Moraine Park looks perfect for spotting wildlife," he said, glancing up. "Elk, mule deer, maybe even a bear if we're lucky." Jennifer arched an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Lucky? I'd say that depends on how close the bear is." Eric laughed, pulling on his jacket. "Fair point. Let's stick to elk for now." The drive to Moraine Park was short but scenic, the road winding through dense forests and open meadows. They arrived early, the dew still clinging to the grasses. Stepping out of the car, Jennifer inhaled deeply, savoring the cool morning air. "It's so quiet," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the serenity. Eric nodded, slinging a small day pack over his shoulder. "Peaceful, isn't it? Let's see what we can find." The trail began at a gentle slope, winding its way through a valley framed by towering peaks. They walked in comfortable silence, the soft crunch of their boots blending with the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It wasn't long before they spotted movement in the distance. Jennifer froze, tapping Eric's arm. "Look," she said, pointing toward a cluster of tall grasses. A small herd of elk was grazing, their graceful forms silhouetted against the morning light. One of the larger bulls raised its head, antlers branching skyward like a crown. "They're magnificent," Jennifer murmured, her voice filled with awe. Eric lifted his camera, careful not to make any sudden movements. The click of the shutter was barely audible, but it captured the moment perfectly, the golden light, the gentle curve of the meadow, and the regal stance of the elk. As they continued their walk, the landscape began to shift. The trail led them through groves of aspen trees, their leaves shimmering like gold coins in the sunlight. A short detour brought them to the banks of the Big Thompson River, its waters clear and cold as they tumbled over smooth stones. Jennifer crouched by the edge, dipping her fingers into the water. "It's icy," she said with a shiver, laughing as she shook the droplets off her hand. Eric sat beside her, letting his gaze wander across the river to the forest beyond. "Can you imagine what it must have been like to live here 100 years ago? No phones, no roads, just this." Jennifer followed his gaze. "It must have been both terrifying and freeing. So much beauty, but also so much unknown." They sat there for a while, the sound of the river weaving itself into the quiet rhythm of their thoughts. A sudden flutter of wings drew their attention upward, where a pair of Steller's jays darted between the trees, their vivid blue feathers flashing against the green canopy. As they made their way back to the main trail, they passed a family of mule deer grazing near the edge of the meadow. The deer regarded them with calm curiosity, their dark eyes watching as the couple walked by. Eric snapped another photo, his movements slow and deliberate. "Wildlife photographer in the making," Jennifer teased, nudging him lightly. Eric grinned. "I just want to remember this every detail." The trail eventually looped back toward the parking area, but neither of them was ready to leave. Spotting a large, flat rock near the edge of the meadow, they sat down to enjoy a snack. The sunlight was warmer now, and the faint hum of insects added a new layer to the morning soundtrack. "Do you think we'll see more?" Jennifer asked, unwrapping a granola bar. Eric shrugged, taking a sip of water. "Maybe. But even if we don't, this has already been incredible." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the crunch of approaching footsteps. A man in his 50s, wearing a broad-brimmed hat and carrying binoculars, smiled as he approached. "Morning," he said, his voice friendly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It really is," Eric replied, nodding in greeting. The man gestured toward the meadow. "If you're patient, you might catch a glimpse of bighorn sheep up near the ridge. They like to graze there this time of year." Jennifer's eyes lit up. "Really? That would be amazing." The man chuckled. "They're a bit elusive, but you've got a good chance on a day like today. Good luck." As the man continued on his way, Jennifer turned to Eric, her excitement barely contained. "Should we wait and see if they show up?" Eric smiled, leaning back on his hands. "Why not? We've got time." They waited, the minutes slipping by in comfortable silence. Jennifer leaned against Eric's shoulder, her eyes scanning the ridge for any sign of movement. It wasn't until they were about to give up that she spotted them. "There," she whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcrop. Sure enough, a small group of bighorn sheep had appeared, their sturdy frames and curved horns perfectly adapted to the rugged terrain. Eric lifted his camera again, capturing the scene as Jennifer watched in awe. "They look so at home here," she said softly. "It's like they belong to another world." For a while, they simply watched, their presence unnoticed by the sheep. It was a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal, a reminder of the untamed beauty of the Rockies. When they finally made their way back to the car, the day felt fuller somehow, as if the encounter had etched itself into their memories. As they drove away, the meadow stretched behind them, bathed in the golden glow of late morning. "This place," Jennifer said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion, "it's magic." Eric reached over, taking her hand in his. "It really is. And it's ours, even if just for a little while." Chapter 5. The midday sun was high above the Rockies as Eric and Jennifer pulled into the parking area for the Halsworth Historic Site. The warmth of the sun offset the cool breeze, and the sight of the rustic cabins nestled in a meadow surrounded by towering pines seemed to promise an entirely different kind of adventure. "This feels like stepping back in time," Jennifer said, pulling her jacket tighter as she gazed at the weathered log buildings. "It's hard to imagine people actually living out here." Eric slung their small day pack over his shoulder. "Well, we're about to find out. Let's see what the guide has to say." A cheerful park ranger stood near the main cabin, dressed in a historically inspired outfit, a wide-brimmed hat, sturdy boots, and a wool vest over a crisp shirt. A small group of visitors was already gathered, listening intently as she described the area's history. "Welcome to the Halsworth Historic Site," the ranger said, her voice carrying easily over the gentle rustle of the trees. "This ranch was established in the early 1900s by the Halsworth family, German immigrants who turned this patch of wilderness into a home and a business. They called it a dude ranch, offering city folk a chance to experience life in the Rockies." Eric and Jennifer joined the group, drawn in by the ranger's warm, engaging storytelling. She led them to the main cabin, its log walls darkened with age but still sturdy. Inside, the scent of pine lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the faint mustiness of history. "This was their living area," the ranger explained, gesturing toward the sparse furnishings, a rough-hewn table, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with simple dishes. Everything they needed had to be brought in by horse or made by hand. Imagine the challenges of surviving a Rocky Mountain winter here. Jennifer ran her fingers lightly over the wooden frame of a rocking chair. It's humbling, isn't it? They didn't just live here, they thrived. The ranger nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's the incredible part. The Halsworths didn't just adapt to the wilderness, they found ways to make it work for them. They built this ranch as a sanctuary, not just for themselves, but for the people who visited. The tour continued through the other buildings, each with its own story to tell. The bunkhouse where guests had stayed was surprisingly cozy, with neatly arranged beds and a row of snowshoes leaning against the wall. A small outbuilding that had once served as the ranch's dairy still smelled faintly of hay and animals. As the group stepped outside, the ranger paused to let the visitors take in the scenery. The meadow stretched wide and open, bordered by the dark green of pine trees and framed by the jagged peaks of the Rockies. A shallow creek meandered through the grass, its waters glinting in the sunlight. It's easy to see why they chose this spot, Eric said quietly, his gaze sweeping over the landscape. It feels untouched even now. Jennifer nodded, slipping her arm through his. It's like a little piece of the past frozen in time. The ranger led them to a shaded area near the creek, where benches had been arranged for a final discussion. She passed around a few historical photographs, black and white images of the Halsworth family posing in front of the ranch. The faces in the photos were rugged but smiling, their pride in their work evident even across the decades. These people weren't just settlers, they were storytellers, the ranger said, her voice warm with admiration. They brought people here to connect with the land, to experience a way of life that was both challenging and rewarding. And they left behind a legacy that reminds us of the resilience and creativity of the human spirit. As the tour concluded, Eric and Jennifer lingered by the creek, watching the sunlight dance across its surface. A few other visitors wandered off toward their cars, leaving the couple alone in the stillness. This might be my favorite part of the trip so far, Jennifer said softly. It's not just the history, it's the feeling that we're connected to it, even in some small way. Eric sat on the edge of the creek, trailing his fingers through the cool water. It's like the people who lived here are still a part of this place. You can almost feel their presence. Jennifer joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. Do you think we'll ever leave a mark like that? Something that lasts, something people remember? Eric smiled, his gaze thoughtful. I think we already do, in small ways. Every kindness, every story we share, it's all part of the legacy we leave behind. For a long while, they sat in comfortable silence, letting the sounds of the creek and the distant rustling of trees fill the space between them. The meadow seemed to hum with life, as if the echoes of the past were still present, mingling with the quiet moments of today. When they finally rose to leave, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the meadow. The cabins stood resolute against the changing light, a testament to the resilience of the people who had once called this place home. As they walked back to the car, Jennifer glanced over her shoulder, taking one last look at the historic site. I'll never forget this place, she said, her voice barely louder than the breeze. It feels like it's a part of me now. Eric wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. Me too. And maybe that's the beauty of it, places like this remind us of who we are and where we come from. The drive back toward their cabin was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, and the mountains stood tall and eternal in the distance. By the time they arrived, The stars were just beginning to emerge, twinkling faintly in the vast expanse of sky. Eric lit a small fire in the cabin's hearth, and they sat together on the floor, wrapped in a blanket and sipping tea. As the fire crackled and the warmth of the day's memories settled over them, they drifted into a shared stillness, content in the knowledge that they had touched a piece of history, and it had touched them in return. Chapter 6. The crisp mountain air greeted Eric and Jennifer as they laced up their boots for another day of exploration. Their goal for the day was to hike the Emerald Lake Trail, one of the park's most famous routes, promising serene alpine lakes and breathtaking views. The excitement was palpable as they double-checked their packs, ensuring they had enough water, snacks, and layers for the changing weather. "This is supposed to be one of the prettiest hikes in the park," Jennifer said, tightening the straps on her backpack. "It feels like we're about to step into a fairy tale." Eric grinned, adjusting his hat. "Well, if we're lucky, we'll find the treasure at the end of this one, Emerald Lake." The trailhead at Bear Lake was already busy with other hikers, the morning buzz of excitement adding to the energy of the day. Despite the activity, the forest soon enveloped them in its peaceful embrace, the towering pines muffling the sound of footsteps and voices. A soft carpet of needles lined the trail, and the occasional chirp of a bird echoed through the trees. The first stop on the trail was Nymph Lake, a small, serene body of water dotted with lily pads. The surface mirrored the blue sky, interrupted only by the ripples from a gentle breeze. Eric and Jennifer paused, taking in the beauty. "It's so peaceful," Jennifer said, crouching by the water's edge. "You can almost hear the silence." Eric snapped a photo, capturing the lake framed by the trees and distant peaks. "This is exactly what I imagined when we planned this trip. A place that just lets you breathe." They lingered for a while, enjoying the tranquility, before continuing the hike. The trail began to climb, offering glimpses of the surrounding mountains through breaks in the trees. As they ascended, they passed other hikers, exchanging smiles and nods, the unspoken camaraderie of shared adventure. The next stop was Dream Lake, and it lived up to its name. The long, narrow expanse of water was bordered by rocky slopes and dotted with boulders, the reflection of the peaks rippling gently on its surface. Jennifer sighed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It feels enchanted," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric nodded, pulling her close. "If this is Dream Lake, I can't imagine what Emerald Lake will be like." As they rested on a large rock near the water, they struck up a conversation with a fellow hiker, a friendly woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Margaret. She had a weathered backpack and an easy smile that hinted at years of outdoor experience. "First time on this trail?" she asked, her voice warm and curious. Jennifer nodded. "It is. We've been blown away by how beautiful it is already." Margaret chuckled. "Wait until you reach Emerald Lake. It's like nothing else. I've been hiking these trails for decades, and it still takes my breath away every time." Encouraged by her words, Eric and Jennifer pressed on, the anticipation building with every step. The trail grew steeper, winding through rocky terrain and shaded by towering evergreens. The sound of a distant waterfall reached their ears, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a bird. When they finally arrived at Emerald Lake, it was as though they had stepped into a different world. The lake was a brilliant shade of green, its clear waters reflecting the jagged peaks that loomed above. Snow still clung to the highest ridges, even in the warmth of summer, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and alpine flowers. Jennifer stood at the edge of the lake, her hand over her heart as she took it all in. "It's perfect," she said, her voice catching. Eric joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You were right, it does feel like a fairy tale. This is the treasure." They found a quiet spot near the shore, where they sat and shared a picnic of sandwiches and fruit. The stillness of the lake seemed to seep into their souls, filling them with a deep sense of peace. Eric leaned back on his hands, watching as a small group of trout darted through the clear water. "I could sit here forever," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Jennifer smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Me too. It's like the world stops here, just for a little while." A young couple approached, asking if they could take a photo for Eric and Jennifer. They agreed, and the resulting image captured the serenity of the moment, the lake behind them, the mountains rising like sentinels, and their faces glowing with quiet joy. As the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting a golden light over the water, Eric and Jennifer reluctantly decided to head back. The return journey was quieter, their earlier excitement replaced by a contented calm. They paused again at Dream Lake and Nymph Lake, each stop feeling like a chance to relive the magic of the day. By the time they reached the trailhead, the sun was setting, painting the peaks in shades of pink and orange. The air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of evening. As they drove back toward their cabin, Jennifer looked out the window, her face illuminated by the last rays of daylight. "Today felt like a dream," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I don't think I'll ever forget it." Eric reached over, taking her hand in his. "Me neither. And the best part is, there's still more to come." When they arrived back at the cabin, the night sky was ablaze with stars. They stepped onto the deck, gazing upward in silence, the vastness of the universe a fitting end to the day's adventure. Wrapped in each other's arms, they let the stillness of the mountains lull them into a shared peace, knowing that this day, this moment, was a treasure they would carry with them forever. Chapter 7. The scent of cedar and the soft crackling of the fire greeted Eric and Jennifer as they settled into their cozy corner table at Sagebrush Barbecue and Grill. The restaurant, with its rustic wooden beams and walls adorned with local memorabilia, felt like the perfect place to wind down after a day of adventure. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet energy, a mix of locals and travelers enjoying hearty meals and easy conversation. Jennifer glanced at the menu, her eyes sparkling. "I don't think I've ever craved comfort food as much as I do right now." Eric chuckled, scanning the offerings. "How about we share? The ribs look incredible, but I'm eyeing the elk chili too." "Perfect," Jennifer said, closing her menu. "And maybe some cornbread on the side?" As they waited for their meal, they listened to the low hum of the restaurant. The warm light from the overhead lanterns cast a golden glow over the room, making it feel like a haven against the cool evening outside. In the far corner, a musician strummed a guitar, his voice weaving a gentle melody that blended seamlessly with the ambience. "Do you hear that?" Jennifer asked, tilting her head toward the music. "It's so calming." Eric nodded, leaning back in his chair. "It's like the soundtrack to the perfect evening." Their food arrived moments later, filling the table with an enticing aroma. The ribs were tender and smoky, the chili rich and flavorful, and the cornbread warm and buttery. They ate slowly, savoring each bite and pausing often to reflect on the day's highlights. Jennifer wiped her hands on a napkin, her expression thoughtful. "It's funny how a place can make you feel so complete." like it fills in all the spaces you didn't even know were empty. Eric set down his fork, meeting her gaze. I know what you mean. It's like the mountains remind you what really matters. Time slows down, and you just feel. After their meal, they lingered over dessert, a shared slice of warm apple pie topped with a generous scoop of vanilla ice cream. Outside, the night had fully taken hold, the stars visible through the restaurant's large windows. As they prepared to leave, the musician shifted to a familiar tune, his voice carrying a soft, nostalgic quality. Jennifer paused by the door, her hand resting lightly on Eric's arm. Let's stay for just one more song, she said softly. I don't want this evening to end just yet. Eric smiled, guiding her to a small bench near the fire. They sat in comfortable silence, the music wrapping around them like a warm blanket. The melody seemed to echo the rhythm of the mountains, steady, timeless, and full of quiet beauty. When they finally stepped outside, the air was crisp and clear, the kind that seemed to amplify the scent of pine and earth. The lights of the restaurant glowed warmly behind them as they strolled back toward their cabin. The path was lined with tall pines, their shadows stretching long under the moonlight. Jennifer slipped her hand into Eric's, her fingers cool but steady. This might be my favorite day so far, she said, her voice a soft murmur. It's like everything just fell into place. Eric glanced up at the sky, the stars scattered across it like diamonds on velvet. It's been perfect, he agreed. But I think the best part has been sharing it all with you. When they reached the cabin, Eric lit a small fire in the hearth while Jennifer prepared 2 mugs of hot chocolate. They sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and leaning into each other, the glow of the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Do you remember that musician's song? Jennifer asked after a while, her voice dreamy. Eric nodded, his eyes half closed. It felt like it was written for this moment. Jennifer rested her head against his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm going to carry this feeling with me for a long time. As the fire burned low and the warmth of the evening settled over them, their voices grew softer, their words fewer. The crackle of the logs and the occasional rustle of the wind outside became a lullaby, drawing them into a shared stillness. Eric reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Jennifer's face as her eyes fluttered closed. Good night, Jen, he whispered. Good night, Eric, she murmured, already drifting off. The cabin grew quiet, save for the gentle rhythm of their breathing and the fading whispers of the fire. Outside, the mountains stood as silent guardians, their timeless presence a reminder of the peace and beauty of the moment. Chapter 8. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains of the cabin, casting a golden glow across the room. Jennifer stirred first, stretching lazily beneath the covers. The fire from the night before had long since gone out, leaving behind the faintest scent of wood smoke mingled with the crisp mountain air. Eric sat at the small table by the window, sipping a steaming cup of coffee. He glanced up as Jennifer rose, offering her a warm smile. Morning, sleepyhead. Jennifer patted over, rubbing her eyes. Morning. Coffee? Already poured, Eric said, gesturing to the second mug waiting on the counter. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, letting the aroma and heat pull her fully awake. Stepping closer to the window, she joined Eric, gazing out at the view. The peaks stood tall and serene, their tops kissed with the first light of day. Below, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, their needles shimmering like emeralds. I don't think I'll ever get tired of this, Jennifer said softly. It's like waking up in a postcard. Eric nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's hard to leave, isn't it? Like part of you wants to stay here forever. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Maybe that's what makes it special. You can't take it with you, but you can carry it in your heart. They spent the morning packing up their things, moving slowly as if to stretch out the time. When they finally loaded the car, Eric lingered by the cabin's porch, taking one last look at the place that had become their sanctuary. Ready? Jennifer asked gently, sensing his hesitation. Eric nodded, his hand finding hers. Yeah. Let's make the most of today. The drive back took them along Trail Ridge Road, the same route that had captivated them on their way in. The scenery felt different in the morning light, the shadows softer and the colors warmer. They stopped at a few overlooks, savoring the views and breathing in the crisp air. At one of the stops, they encountered a group of hikers preparing for a climb. One of them, a young man with a wide smile and a map in hand, struck up a conversation with Eric about the surrounding peaks. You've got to come back in the fall, the man said enthusiastically. The aspens turn gold, and it's like the whole mountain is glowing. Jennifer listened, smiling at the idea. Sounds like the perfect excuse for another trip. Back on the road, they decided to make one last stop in Estes Park. The charming mountain town felt both familiar and new, its streets bustling with a mix of locals and tourists. They found a seat outside at Kind Coffee, the morning crowd thinning as the day wore on. Eric sipped his drink, watching the passers-by with a relaxed smile. Remember that shopkeeper we met the first day? She said this place had the best hot chocolate. Jennifer laughed. She wasn't wrong. It's almost too good. I'll never want another one anywhere else. As they finished their drinks, they decided to take a final stroll through the town. The sun was warm now, casting a cheerful light over the quaint storefronts and mountain backdrops. They wandered into a small boutique filled with locally made crafts and souvenirs. Jennifer picked up a hand-carved ornament shaped like a mountain range. What do you think? A little piece of the Rockies to take home with us? Eric smiled, nodding. Perfect. Every time we see it, we'll remember this trip. Their last stop was the Riverwalk, where the sound of the rushing Big Thompson River provided a soothing soundtrack. They leaned against the railing, watching as the water tumbled over rocks and branches. It's funny, Jennifer said after a long silence. I thought this trip would be about escaping, but it's more like finding something. Eric looked at her, his gaze steady. Like finding yourself again. Or finding us. She smiled, her eyes glistening with quiet emotion. Exactly. As they walked back to the car, the town seemed to bid them farewell, its charm lingering in the air. The drive away from Estes Park was bittersweet, the mountains growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Do you think we'll come back? Jennifer asked, her voice hopeful. Eric reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Absolutely. This place is part of us now. The highway stretched out before them, leading back toward the routines and responsibilities of daily life. But the mountains, the lakes, and the quiet moments they had shared remained etched in their hearts. As the day faded into evening, and the lights of the city came into view, Jennifer leaned her head against the window, her voice soft but certain. We'll always have the Rockies. Eric smiled, his own thoughts mirroring hers. And they'll always have us. In the quiet rhythm of the car, with the road humming beneath them and the memories of the weekend fresh in their minds, they found a new kind of peace, one that would carry them forward even as the mountains disappeared into the distance. The end.